Today we're going to be reading The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, Chapter 3. And while we're reading today, I want you to be thinking about how does Abilene feel about Edward, okay? So notice how Abilene talks about Edward, maybe the emotions that you can feel that she's showing towards him. So how does that make you feel that Abilene feels towards Edward? "She is called the Queen Mary," said Abeline's father, "and you and your mamma and I shall sail on her all the way to London." "What about Pellegrina?" said Abeline. "I will not go," said Pellegrina. "I will stay." Edward, of course, was not listening. He found the talk around dinner table excruciatingly dull. In fact, he made a point of not listening if he could help it. But then Abilene did something unusual, something that forced him to pay attention. As the talk about the ship continued, Abilene reached for Edward and took him from his chair and stood him in her lap. "And what about Edward?" she said, her voice high and uncertain. "What about him, darling?" said her mother. "Will Edward be sailing on the Queen Mary with us?" "Well, of course, if you wish, although you are getting a little old for such things as China rabbits." "Nonsense," said Abeline's father jovially. Who would protect Abilene if Edward was not there? From the vantage point of Abeline's lap, Edward could see the whole table spread out before him in a way that he never could when he was seated in his own chair. He looked upon the glittering array of silverware and glasses and plates, and he saw the amused and condescending looks of Abeline's parents, and then his eyes met Pellegrina's. She was looking at him in the way a hawk, hanging lazily in the air, might study a mouse on the ground. So I want to stop right there, and I want you to think for a second how Pellegrina is looking at Edward. It says she was looking at him in the way a hawk, hanging lazily in the air, might study a mouse on the ground. How do you think a hawk would be staring at a mouse? I'm going to give you some time to think. Maybe talk about it with your parent or your sibling next to you. How would a hawk be studying a mouse? If I were to picture that, I'd be thinking that a hawk would be glaring at the mouse, would be having an intent, focused look, not taking their eyes off that mouse, kind of like just a cold, hard stare. Okay, and it thumbs up if that's what you were thinking. I'm sure you guys were. Perhaps the rabbit fur on Edward's ears and tail and the whiskers on his nose had some dim memory of being hunted, for a shiver went through him. "Yes," said Pellegrina, without taking her eyes off Edward. "Who would watch over Abilene if the rabbit were not there?" That night, when Abilene asked, as she did every night, if there would be a story, Pellegrina said, "Tonight, lady, there will be a story." Abilene sat up in bed. "I think that Edward needs to sit here with me," she said, "so that he can hear the story too." "I think that is best," said Pellegrina. "Yes, I think that the rabbit must hear the story." Abilene picked Edward up, sat him next to her in bed, and arranged the covers around him. Then she said to Pellegrina, "We are ready now." "So," said Pellegrina. She coughed. "And so the story begins with a princess." "A beautiful princess?" Abilene asked. "A very beautiful princess." "How beautiful?" "You must listen," said Pellegrina. "It is all in the story." So I want you guys just to think for a moment, how do you think Abilene feels about Edward? Okay, I want you to just pause and think. I have a few thoughts about that, but I'll give you a second. Okay, one of the things that I notice is that she's always concerned about Edward. When her parents bring up going on the Queen Mary, right away she's like, "Oh, can Edward come with us?" She seems like she's very concerned about him, and she wants Edward with her all the time, seems like in every aspect of her life. And then when it was time for her grandmother, Pellegrina, to tell her a story, she made sure Edward was right next to her, and she put the blankets all around him, covered him up, kind of like she's taking really great care of him. So to me, that lets me know that this Rabbit Edward is very important to Abilene. Okay, so I want to know what your guys' thoughts are. You can go ahead and talk with the parent. You can go ahead and type it in the Google Classroom, whatever you guys want to do. Okay, goodbye.